All right, that was a truly fascinating conversation. We very much appreciate it, looking at how to measure cognitive skills that drive human performance across the lifespan. We also want to go ahead and look at hiring George as a reporter for the HBJ with all the probing questions. Those were good. But we're going to go ahead and move into how organizations can apply some of these insights directly. We're gathered in an incredible and relatively new space, the TMC3 building. Let's see how it stacks up with the next group of discussions. The next session will explore the physical design of workspaces, how they can enhance cognitive well-being, boost employee engagement, and improve business outcomes, or not. This panel will be followed by a short break before we gather for one final discussion of the day. Please welcome to the stage now our moderator, Dr. Margaret Tarampi, Director of University Interdisciplinary Studies, Associate Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of Hartford, Stevie McCoy, Chief Strategy Officer with HKS Inc., Gail Motry, Global Vice President, Brand Experiences and Workplace Innovation, Steelcase, and Al Raba, Regional Head of Projects and Transactions for Corporate Real Estate with Americas at McCardry Group.
Thank you so much. You know, during this conversation, we've been talking about these larger scales, talking about how do we foster brain economy, brain capital, at the scale of a country and at the scale of an organization. And so we're going to talk today about some more practical interventions or things that we can consider in terms of the built environment as an asset to fostering brain health and brain capital. This is going to be a much more, I think, conversational panel, and I hope that folks will also join in the conversation. I don't even know how to change that, but there's a QR code if there's things that you want to provide in about the questions that we'll be covering. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to start it off and have each of our distinguished panel to talk about some of the evidence-based approaches that they are employing in their own organizations. And Stevie, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much. Stevie McCoy, Chief Strategy Officer at HKS, and my background, I am an industrial organizational psychologist by trade. So brain health and its impact on engagement and performance is really near and dear to my heart, as it is to HKS as well. You know, thinking about how space itself impacts brain health, brain capital, and drives performance. Back in 2020, the pandemic, when we all went home, we said this is a perfect opportunity to experiment on ourselves. So we set up a series of internal surveys. We took them with regularity. This really, it generated some amazing data, which led us to a partnership in 2021 with the Center for Brain Health in Dallas. So we put a pilot program together and asked the question, we used one of our offices, roughly around 200 people, how does the space and process and technology impact our ability to perform? So really impact brain capital. And what we found was pretty compelling. Throughout this study, we said, what really, the space provides us affordances that do drive that performance. The affordance of focus, the affordance of connection, the affordance of rest. And so all of these things started coming out and really led us into making this a part of our strategy, not only for our design services and our commercial space, our commercial interiors, but really how we operate internally and how we activate our own strategy, looking at how profound it is on the performance and engagement, productivity, all of it, of our employees.
Great, thank you. Gail, do you have that?
Yeah.
So this whole conversation is what we do with our clients. It's actually how we advise and counsel on what they should buy. If you do or don't know Steelcase, we make furniture. We design and make furniture, and we make it for offices, we make it for health, and we make it for learning. But the true value of what we offer isn't in the things that we make. They're pretty good things, but it really is how you use them. And it's how you put them together to create the kinds of spaces that, you know, Stevie was describing.
Yeah.
And a quick story for you, because we've talked a lot about measurement today. Back in 2015, Steelcase has always done research, and we have global researchers. And we started becoming really interested in the topic of engagement. And I'd say more concerned, because as we'd always survey employees, we'd survey leaders, and we would see engagement numbers going down. So exploding engagement a little bit is when we started to think about well-being, or flourishing, if we want to call it that. And then we thought, well, you really can't talk about how you design a better space for well-being if you don't understand what we mean by well-being. We said there is physical well-being, there is emotional well-being, and there's cognitive well-being. So the idea of all of that got us very, very interested in exploring that further so that we could understand when employees are highly engaged, the research that we did showed that they also really liked their work environment. So then exploring a little more, exploding what it was that they really liked about their work environment is what helped us to start thinking about what are the things you need to do to make sure you have that right blend of physical, emotional, and then cognitive well-being. And then we practice on ourselves. You know, we have our researchers work with our designers, they create the spaces, we make sure they work. We have various ways of measuring that, and when they do work, that's what we promote. When they don't work, we also promote what doesn't work, because there's a lot of bad offices out there too.
Al?
Yeah, my name is Al. I work for an Australian-based bank called Macquarie. So one of our strongest, cultural beliefs and principles is that people are our strongest asset, right? And I work in the corporate real estate team. When we deliver our workplaces, we try to align to that cultural principle as much as possible. We take a very human-centric design approach to how we deliver workplaces. We spend the majority of our days in the office, right? Spend a lot of time, even in a hybrid environment. It is a big part of our life. And one of the things that we uncovered is what's really important to people in the workplace is the connection with others and how they work with others and the collaboration with others. And we started to move away from traditional office build-outs and more open planning approach, but also how do we connect the different businesses across the organization. And what that fostered is a lot of creativity, collaboration, involuntary bumping into each other across the office, right? And then that's when the idea developed that connectivity and social connectivity really is the most important part of our workplace. Even if we are on multiple floors, right? It's kind of hard, and we're a financial institution, so we operate behind information barriers. But how can we bring staff together, right? For example, in New York, we built a 7-story interconnecting staircase, and it's quite common. A lot of companies do it. But we did it in such a way that it was pretty open, and all the program that we designed in our office surrounds that staircase so that people that use the office have to congregate there. It's been really effective. We've been in the office for a few months, but we've already are starting to notice there's a lot of the bump-in factors, and that's just from pure feedback that we get from our businesses, right? And that's when we learned that the social connectivity in the way we work in our workplace is very, very important to our staff and the way we work every day.
Great, thank you. We can see that there is a really kind of more holistic view about brain health here, right? That very much aligned with the World Health Organization's definition of health, right? Complete physical, mental, and social well-being. And that's, I think, what we'll hear in terms of these interventions, or that these, the built environment, how they are trying to address each of those things, to think about the person, again, as a whole being. Which I think brings us to this question about how do we measure the impact of these interventions? And I think maybe Gail, you want to talk a little bit more about things that Steelcase does?
Yeah, well, the measurement really starts at the beginning. If you don't have a baseline for what it is that it's people, not only what they're doing, but how they feel or what they need, you're not going to have anything after that. So, I mean, we do a number of things with ourselves and with our clients. We have surveys that we always do, and they're not surveys about the space. They're not even surveys about the functional work that people do, which is what most design students get taught to do when you do programming. It's really around what the people are doing, the things that what are they doing so that you can determine what they need. And one of the interesting things right now, and I would certainly support Al when he talks about work being inherently social, and we do need those collaborative spaces. We got to be careful we don't over-index on that. Because if you're really paying attention to the holistic needs of people, yes, we socialize, yes, we collaborate, we also focus and we learn. And that, I'm quoting Nonaka, that's Nonaka's theory of organizational work behavior. But we added a fifth one at Steelcase, we added rejuvenate. And so what we constantly measure is how we can create spaces that can address all of those things, but essentially provide a range of spaces that people could use. And I think anybody like me who was ushered into a gray cubicle in the 80s and 90s, and Steelcase made a lot of money from gray cubicles, but that one size fits all, that didn't work. I think we moved to another extreme, maybe in the early 2000s, where all of a sudden everybody wanted to be Google, and everybody wanted to be completely open. And so out there, that's a little bit of a fallacy as well. And so trying to create a range of spaces where we would say people have the choice and the control. So depending on your preferences or where you are in some sort of neurodiverse spectrum, you can find exactly what you need, which is what I know you designed for. Right. So measuring against that becomes really important. And then ultimately, I mean, there's several ways you can measure. There are better and better sensing devices all the time. They measure occupancy. They don't necessarily measure affectiveness. Right. So we're really strong believers in mentioning how do the spaces make people feel, and do they understand that they do have that choice and the control, therefore, to find what they need for what they're doing at that particular time.
I think that's really interesting, and it hits on the intentionality about the space. So matching the space to the need at the time, and putting it in terms of measurement. I come at it as if it's an investment our firm is making, wearing my strategy or business hat, are we investing in something that's going to grow our business? And I'm not talking just about revenue, but I'm talking about whatever business metric your organization has in mind. Are you equipping your people with the spaces that they need to perform the functions that they need to do in the best way? And so collaboration spaces are great for collaborating, but most organizations don't just collaborate all day long. I mean, you have the work that needs to happen, the individual work, the work that, when you're at the office and you're not working, you need to rejuvenate. And I think that that's really important, and to say, is my space, again, is it serving us, giving us what we need to do the work that we have to do? And that's where it gets really individualized. And mapping it to your own strategy and your own outcomes. And I know that it's not, it's not, you can't say causation, you can't say the space is driving that, but it is a key lever, a key element, and if it's off, then you're not unlocking the potential of your people to do the work that they need to do to deliver the goals that your business needs.
I think what all this points to is that the workplace clearly is a big part of our well-being and how we work, right, on a day-to-day basis.
We spend a lot of time there.
We spend a lot of time there. So definitely, and people are our company's strongest asset in that regard, right? So we've really doubled down on that in terms of delivering workplaces and hearing from our people, and how we can really organize that in a more focused way through discussions with them pre and post, right? And it's not, you're never going to really make everyone happy across the organization, but it's about understanding the common trends and themes of what's really, really important to staff, right? Especially coming at the back end of the pandemic, and The way we work is certainly different, and people now look for different things in offices than they probably did 7 years ago, or how do we change that approach and moving forward, right? So I think what we've learned from the conversation is that people are what's most important, right?
I think something that you said, Al, makes me want to ask this question, which maybe I'm opening a Pandora's box, but what is everyone's definition of workplace? I think that's rapidly changing, or has been changing and evolving particularly over the past years, and now that many organizations and companies are asking folks to return to the workplace, what does that mean in terms of the kinds of spaces that were traditionally set or thought about as being office space?
Well, I think, like it or not, we are, I think, forever hybrid. I think that you mentioned Pandora's box. I think that was opened in COVID for many, I mean, not all industries, but for a good number of industries, even the ones that, HKS, we do have a flexible work policy where there is in-office work, and then the ability to flex. That means that we have to behave differently, but that also means that there are space expectations. So people that went home during COVID got used to stuff. They got used to a certain way of working. They got used to the coffee that they liked. They got used to the comforts. They got used to the control of their space. They got used to the control of the acoustics, the control of the temperature, the control of their footwear. If you want to wear slippers to work, I guess you still can. But I do think that they bring back those expectations with them to work, and also the way that they work. I mean, working, the Zoom calls. Zoom is not going away. What do office spaces do about that? Because that's a huge question. How do we accommodate the collaborative workspaces and where you want people to come in and feel comfortable ideating and innovating, but also those spaces where if you need to take a couple of hours of Zoom calls, you can go to in a private setting that's comfortable. I think those are all space considerations that really weren't around 5 years ago that are definitely at the forefront now.
Yeah, we just finished some research on managers and the role of the manager, and actually discovered how managers are saying that their sense of well-being or how they're flourishing is going down even more rapidly than some of the employees.
Yep.
So it really is this middle manager dilemma, and we think that part of it is because of what you just talked about. Like the hybrid's a reality everywhere in the world that we work and we do the research. You always have people who are shoulder to shoulder and people who are through a screen.
Yep.
And it is really hard work to get the people who are remote feeling as equally engaged in the meetings. Like, you have to be a really good facilitator. A lot of these managers are being left to be the facilitator. So, what we're very interested in is how can the space actually help you with that?
Yes.
Right, so we do a lot of work together with Zoom, but also Microsoft, Logitech. So they have the technology, the technologies, the AI assistants that you all probably use. You maybe don't call them AI assistants, but if you're using Teams or Logitech, you have AI assistants
That
that are
sounds
helping
fancier.
you. Yeah,
The AI
it sounds a little
assistant.
fancier.
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
not AI agents, but they're AI assistants. The tech companies will tell you that they will only work as well as the environment that they're in. So literally the rooms that you put them in, how you design the room, and even though it's my job to talk about furniture, how you design the shape of the table.
That's
And the
right.
distance between the table and the screen, and where you locate the screen. We always strive for what we would call eye-to-eye connection, which, wonderful as it was to have those virtual speakers today, like looking up like that is really hard all the time. Yeah, and so those are a lot of things that may sound like, of course, when you say them out loud, and yet remarkably, people don't think about that when they're designing the work environments. Clever people in the industry do, but there's still so many people that have to be educated about that.
Right.
And that's where the connection back to making sure that everybody feels equally engaged and they feel that sense of equity in terms of contribution. I mean, that's a huge part of cognitive well-being.
Flourishing in the workplace, yeah.
I think one of the questions here is about scaling and how do we help scale these kind of ideas or interventions. And that could mean a lot of things, I think, in terms of implementation. So maybe folks can talk a little bit about the ways in which you're implementing these practices that are centered on brain health within maybe even your field more broadly, if not within your organization. Yeah. Maybe Gail can kick this off as
sure,
well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. The scaling is hard, and it's a little bit like the whole issue we've talked about today is how do you go from talk to action? And awareness is one of the ways you have to do it. So we do spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time traveling around the world just advising people on things that may seem relatively simple or mundane, like your office, like you're actually have huge potential or opportunity to impact people's cognitive, emotional, physical well-being. I think also the opportunity some of us have is to really influence the people who will be influencing the spaces. So we spend a lot of time with design students and in the schools actually exposing them to some of the things that we have learned. If you are, if you've studied neuroarchitecture, you get that at school. There's increasing interest in the idea of neuroaesthetics. The interior design profession does not necessarily take that same perspective. So I think building that awareness, and of course, one of the fortunate things about what we do is we work with leading organizations everywhere in the world, and believe me, every chance we get, we are talking about the cognitive and emotional well-being of the people in the space, which for many of them is a little bit of a surprise. It's like, oh, you're just here to tell us about the furniture. Well, no, it's how you, it's what you end up with at the end, the space at the end that actually is going to make the difference. So, wish there was a faster answer than that, but it's that constant awareness. And
it's slow work. I mean, it's cumulative and slow. And in the first session, somebody mentioned this idea of competition, and how do you deal with that? We think that the old adage, the rising tide lifts all ships. Building networks, HKS just started a Building Brains Coalition that is grabbing folks from disparate industries to really open up this idea and talk more about brain health, talk more about the space implications of brain health. It requires a steady conversation that brings more people in, that asks questions, that does training, and I think there's a lot of learning that has to happen. But that's really how you scale it. And you take big chances and do pilot programs and gather data, and then apply the data and gather more data. But that's how we look at it. But really the key is building that network and talking about it as much as possible with as many people as possible. And that's how we were going about it.
I think also part of this, Stevie was talking about the ways that you, and I think everyone has talked about this, kind of feedback loops within your organizations in order to kind of reinforce these ideas, these values you have as companies, both in practice but also organizational leadership.
Right. And not everybody's on board. I wish I could get up here and say, everybody, you mention it and you explain it and people are like, oh yes. Not everyone's on board. And I think that's where the education comes in. And that's where when you think about leadership that is really firm on, this is what we're doing. We have the evidence. This is where we want to go. And it is as an IO psychologist, change management is enablement. How are we enabling leaders to adopt this? How are we removing barriers for people to explore, these interventions that we're talking about? To dip their toe in the water, to make sure that feedback loop. We do surveys. We talk about it with leadership. We talk about those people who, frankly, aren't as convinced yet, because they're still valuable in the conversation. So I think that facilitation is important at the executive level. You talked about mid-managers, and those are the folks that really, that's where the rubber hits the road, and some of the interventions that we have internally And as we go out and sell it to our clients, working with them to help them design the perfect space for their organization, bending where we need to, but being resolute about the outcome, which is elevating brain capital.
I would like to see the media talk more about it.
What was that?
The media.
Yes.
Because it's particularly since the pandemic, like the world of go to work, go to an office, or stay home has
Yeah.
never been more of a topic
Yeah.
than it is right now. And the media gets so much of it wrong.
They do.
Probably because they're journalists who sit and work at home, and that's what they know, right? And I think there's an opportunity because we see more and more employees expecting their organizations to take care of their well-being and their mental health. The numbers, there is recent research that we just published that shows how many people in the US believe it's important and yet they don't believe their employers know how to do it. In Canada, I live in Toronto, it's now like 8 out of 10 Canadians believe that their organization should take care of them, and only 2 out of 10 think their organizations need to know how to do it.
It's a big delta.
So I think the more that we talk about that and it becomes an expectation of an employee to go into an environment where they say, I can do what I need to here. This feels good here, and there's a reason why I want to be here versus being at home, even though the flexibility, I don't think that's ever going to change either.
Yeah.
Organizations are going to have to say, yes, you have flexibility. But as we see more and more senior leaders, and you've all read about them in the paper, saying, I want my people back, and I want them back all the time. That's going to be a little bit contentious, I guess, for a while. But that's where those senior leaders, I hope, will understand that the better you make the environment, the better chance you have of bringing people together to do what they want. And if I may, I'll add one more thing, because sometimes the real estate industry makes me a little nuts as well as the media.
Go easy on him. She didn't mean that.
Not at your end of what you do. But when you go looking for a Class A building and they'll say, well, this is really good because we have lots of windows. That's great. That's a really good thing to do. And then they'll say, and we have a gym on site, and there's places where people can do yoga. Yes, good. And what about the things they do with the other 7 or 8 hours during the day where they're doing their jobs, they're trying to work well with each other, they're trying to work well on their own? Most people don't go to work to do a bad job. They go to work to do a really good job. And so that's what I would like to see us all focus on just a little more. There's a publication we produce, and I try to get it out there as much as I can. It's called Work Better. We talk a lot about that in there. So my hope is just the more that we share all of that, not only with the facilities people or people that are doing the spaces, but with the people making the decisions.
Yeah.
And then with the employees, I think that we will see more momentum now than we've seen in decades.
It's funny because the gym is, when we were picking our building, like that's the first question that anyone would, all staff that we dealt with, the first question is, oh, does the building have a gym, or does the office have a gym? And I think it's important because like they, and it depends on where you work and how many hours you work, but it's like people are still trying to fit their, their day-to-day or what they do on a personal level somewhere in their day. And I think it's creating an environment that's, and I think it's very important to separate obviously work and personal life, but to a certain degree, if the workplace will allow staff to have an easier life somehow in terms of fulfilling some of that, I think that does go a long way. Gyms, amenities, all that stuff was very important in property selection wherever we work, right? But I think it's also kind of for us, and a big part of our focus is implementing sustainable design in our workplaces, natural light as much as possible, outdoor, right? And depending on the city and where you are, it's hard to include some of that. But even if you're working up front with landlords or implementing into your own space, I think that's everyone gets excited about that type of stuff, right? So it's stuff that we've noticed people, and I think one way to measure this is measuring your occupancy, and that's data that can easily be compiled as how well do people actually like the office, right? Like, so if you're moving offices or you're building a new workplace, what is the difference in occupancy, right? And are you noticing that? Because that's what's really going to be important for the people, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to add a little bit about, thinking of, I wish we had a gym. Now that you got me thinking about that. But I guess it gives me an excuse. No, but, having the space, so you mentioned natural light. Having a space that has natural light and the biophilia, we all, the evidence shows that this drives brain health. And having spaces for collaboration, the connectivity, all of it is for naught if you are not behaving in the space. And a lot of this goes to leadership too, and how the expectations of behavior in that space are actually unlocking the power of the space. And we find that it's going in and helping our clients design their work, whether it's a retrofit or a new build. And then, sometimes, when we do the post-occupancy, are they utilizing the space the way it was designed, the way that the research in brain health really, dictates? And a lot of times, no. So a lot of times that, we all know that going in and everybody sitting at their desk and doing Zoom is not unlocking the space potential. So this becomes a scheduling thing, and this becomes an intentionality thing, and this becomes a really looking at that meeting and understanding what the outcomes of that meeting are. So it becomes much more than the space itself. And I think that sometimes goes overlooked when we talk about this. When we talk about building for brain health, it goes beyond that to the action in the space. Because as designers, the designers think about that. The furniture designers think about how it could be used, how it should be used. But it does take that discipline to do that. So, and that's another important facet of it.
Yeah, and having the right range of spaces.
And having the right range for what you need to do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we have some research that just recently showed people telling us that when they go into the office, if they don't have an assigned space,
yes.
which that's a whole controversial thing now, do I have something of my own or not?
Yep.
And they just have to find a place at a bench.
Yep.
They do a land grab. They spread all their things out, and so that they can have that space for the entire day. But then what they don't do is move. So they're staying at that space all day long. They're not moving. They're taking back-to-back calls. People at an open bench doing back-to-back calls, what do? You put on your earphones because you can't hear each other.
Yep.
So now the whole point of being together with other people, it's not there, right? It's not going to happen. So if you don't provide them with the ability to, within close proximity, get up and go find something, it probably needs more acoustical privacy if you're going to do a decent Teams or Zoom call. And if you don't have enough of those spaces, then we're not going to change that situation.
Nope.
So the longer they're sitting there all day long doing these back-to-back calls, it's just not good for anybody. And it's a very real situation. It's something that we all need to think about.
Yeah, very real. And that drains you. So then you leave not regenerate, you leave with a deficit of brain capital, really. So it is a delicate balance in the choreography of that space.
Again, the education part. They don't think, a lot of employees don't think that way.
No, they don't.
They don't think, well, if I just sit here all day long doing back-to-back calls, I'm being really productive. Well, no, you're not.
No.
Maybe first thing in the morning when we've had some rest, but our brains get tired, right?
Yeah, they do.
I think that brings up an interesting question about, we've kind of been talking about the individual in some ways in terms of personalization, the need for ownership. But a lot of times we're moving to the office because people are collaborating, people are working in groups. And so how do we think about teams and the ways in which now we have kind of more dispersed groups working together, different locations, geographically, also even within a workspace. What does that, I guess, look like in terms of the ways that you approach thinking about workplaces, or what are you seeing in the market? Al, do you want to say something?
I mean, it's part of the reason why we work really closely with Microsoft and Logitech and the others, because technology, until fairly recently, it's always the last thing you think about. Like you figure out what the people do, you sort of design for that, you design all the meeting rooms, and then you go, oh yeah, now we have to bring our IT guys in. And that really has to change, because you really do need to think about how the technology, the architecture, the accoutrements or affordances, the other affordances in the space, like the furniture, how is it all going to work together so that you have the best spaces?
I think we leverage technology certainly a lot more. The ability to have an audio-visual or video conferencing meeting, obviously, you know, the Zoom aspect coming out of COVID was a big thing, but how do we actually implement that in the office space and make it user-friendly and easy to use? For us, we've learned to create workplaces in a little bit more of a flexible manner as well. Whether it's through furniture, which is one thing, or the way we actually, you know, if we have a sharing ratio as opposed to people having one-to-one desking, which is always kind of like a business and senior leadership thing that real estate has to defend somehow, but that's just, you know, what happens. But it's more about you know, it doesn't have to be a traditional workplace in the sense that, you know, if the companies themselves or teams are changing the way they work, whether there's a lot more travel or it's a hybrid environment, right? And we've certainly learned to adapt to that from a workplace perspective, and people are slowly getting used to it. But every business and every organization is different, right? And there's not one size fits all. So I think having a more moderate, balanced approach in the way you deliver your workplace and really listening to the businesses is the key part of it, right?
Agreed.
I think we've kind of been covering this as well, but I think this last question about connection is related also to this idea of the hybrid office, but then also just going back to the office, about employee engagement and connection, and how does space or place or environment, how do they contribute to creating or fostering, you know, social well-being within offices?
That connection, you know, and I'm sure that you've heard this, you know, stuff like the serendipitous interaction in the office, and how the space is created really guides you to how you see people, when you see people. You can absolutely have a space that encourages isolation. And that space could be because of the desk it is, or the cubicle. It could be because of the environment where everyone puts on headphones because they want to control the acoustics better, and so that isolates everyone, and you might as well be at home anyway. But how does the space, you know, do you have a place designated for people to eat lunch together? You know, does your office have that? If it doesn't, where are people going to eat lunch? At their desk, right? With a headphone on. So it's not really, it's not driving that connection. And really, one of the biggest reasons that we come to the office is for that connection that cannot really happen well online. And that's for the face-to-face and that physical. And if your space isn't encouraging it and unlocking that, then it's a waste at this point, because then people, if your employees leave and say, well, that was a waste, I should have stayed at home, you know, that's not good. I always say we want to create something that makes it worth the commute. Because these days, if you say this is not worth the commute, it's not worth the shower, it's not worth the tolls, but please take a shower. But you know what I mean. If it's not worth that, and that's not, in your mind, that value prop is not there, then you don't have an engaged workforce.
The CEO of Cisco holds his facilities people to something when they're doing new spaces, and he says, tell me what the return on the commute is going to be.
Yep.
And I thought that one was really great, because it has to be the return for the organization, but also the return for the employee. Yeah. And then here's the part that requires anybody thinking about changing their work environment to work with professionals. Everything that you said is right, and that's what they need. When we ask people what is the #1 thing that they want at work, guess what they say? Privacy. So yes, they do want that connection, they do want the collaboration, but they do also want privacy. And so that is what makes it a challenge, is how do you do both? because the either or doesn't work anymore, and it's trying to figure out how to do both that is really the operative thing right now.
For the specific thing. So privacy when you need privacy, then collaboration space with great technology when you need that too, and knowing the difference. Yeah.
Is privacy about what you were talking about earlier about needing focus time?
Both.
Or is it about
You know what,
something else?
it tends to be several things. Sometimes it's deep focus. A lot of people do want to be able to go into deep focus and not say, well, I'm going to drive home now because I have to deep focus. But there's territorial privacy, there's acoustical privacy. Sometimes it's just boundary. And
Conversational privacy.
Conversational privacy, yeah. And so that's where even thinking how you construct something that feels like a beautiful lounge space, which seems so simple. We see lounge spaces all over the world not working because they stuck them in the wrong spot, or they didn't give people any sense of boundary, or they weren't sensitive to the proximity to other parts of the space. So again, there's some fundamental basic design principles that need to be applied so that you can address all of that and then really get maximum usage or efficiency out of your space.
That's right.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for your wonderful questions. I hope you've come find us after this.
Yes.
And then I think we're off to we have a break, and then we'll meet up again. Thank you.